What drives a person to commit unspeakable acts of violence? What darkness could turn an ordinary individual into a monster? Today, we unravel the chilling enigma of Richard Chase, a man whose crimes defied comprehension. Known as the Vampire of Sacramento, his case is shrouded in terror and unanswered questions. Join us as we delve into the mysteries surrounding one of the most disturbing figures in American history. You won't believe what we uncover. The strange boy nobody noticed. Richard Trenton Chase was born on May 23, 1950 in Sacramento, California. He seemed like an ordinary child, but behind closed doors his life was anything but. Raised in a household rife with tension, Chase experienced strict discipline from his father, leaving emotional scars that would never heal. But here's the eerie part. There were warning signs of something much darker lurking beneath his quiet exterior. From a young age, Chase exhibited bizarre behavior. He was fascinated with death, often harming small animals in ways that shocked those who knew him. Even his friends began to distance themselves. It's a pattern we've seen before in infamous criminals, but no one suspected what Richard would become. Adding to his already fractured psyche was the volatile environment at home. His father was known for his erratic temper, often lashing out at Chase and his mother. These episodes of emotional and physical abuse planted seeds of resentment and isolation. Moreover, his mother's overprotectiveness and paranoia further suffocated his ability to develop socially. The constant exposure to these extremes, fear and control, deepened his detachment from reality. As Chase grew older, his struggles only worsened. In his teenage years, he began abusing alcohol and drugs, further distancing himself from those around him. He failed to maintain relationships, often accusing others of plotting against him. By the time he reached his early 20s, he had developed a belief that his heart had stopped functioning properly and that his blood was turning to powder. These delusions marked the beginning of his descent into a world of terror and violence, a mind untethered from reality. By his early 20s, Chase's mental state began to unravel in terrifying ways. He developed delusions that his blood was drying up and believed his organs were disappearing. What caused these beliefs? Was it the result of untreated schizophrenia? Or did something more sinister shape his mind? His paranoia grew stronger each day, and the line between reality and delusion blurred beyond recognition. Chase became obsessed with the idea that his body was wasting away. He started conducting bizarre experiments on himself, even going so far as to inject animal blood directly into his veins. These self-destructive attempts to heal himself showcased the depth of his mental anguish and his twisted logic. In an attempt to save himself, Chase began capturing and killing animals, consuming their blood. This bizarre ritual gave him a fleeting sense of relief, but it wasn't enough. The act of drinking blood became an addiction, one that he believed was keeping him alive. Over time, he grew more detached from humanity, isolating himself from the outside world and retreating deeper into his psychosis. Chase's obsession spiraled further when he convinced himself that animal blood was no longer sufficient. He believed he needed a stronger, more potent source to sustain himself. The thought consumed him day and night, driving him to the brink of unspeakable acts. His deteriorating mental state and growing detachment from reality painted a chilling picture of what was to come. But no one could have imagined the horrors he was about to unleash. The first victim in a chilling pattern. On December the 29th, 1977, the city of Sacramento was rocked by a random and senseless killing. Ambrose Griffin, a 51-year-old father of two, was shot dead while helping his wife carry groceries. The randomness of the act sent waves of fear throughout the community. Who could commit such a cold and calculated act without any apparent motive? For investigators, the lack of clues made the case all the more puzzling. But Griffin was only the beginning. Chase's delusions were spiraling, driving him to seek out more victims to satisfy his twisted needs. Over the next month, his behavior escalated in ways no one could predict. On January 23, 1978, he broke into the home of Teresa Wallin, a 22-year-old pregnant woman, in what appeared to be a random attack. However, what unfolded inside her home was anything but random. Wallin's murder shocked even the most seasoned investigators. The brutality of the act was almost incomprehensible, but it was the ritualistic nature of what Chase did afterward that truly disturbed them. He mutilated her body in ways that defied explanation, drinking her blood in a grotesque attempt to heal his imagined ailments. To Chase, this wasn't just murder. It was a necessity to sustain his warped perception of survival. Wallin's home became a crime scene, unlike anything authorities had seen before. Blood was smeared on the walls, and evidence suggested that Chase lingered for hours, completely disconnected from the humanity of his victim. The sheer savagery of the act painted a portrait of a predator who no longer saw his victims as people, but as tools to feed his delusions. The discovery of Wallin's body sent shockwaves through the community. People locked their doors and windows, fearing a predator lurking in the shadows. The city was gripped by terror as whispers of a vampire killer began to spread. What drove Richard Chase to such depths of depravity? And more chillingly, what would stop him from striking again? The House of Horrors. On January 27, 1978, Chase's killing spree reached its horrifying peak. He entered the home of Evelyn Miroth, a 38-year-old woman, and what unfolded next was beyond comprehension. Chase brutally murdered everyone inside. Evelyn, her 6-year-old son Jake, her 22-month-old nephew David Ferreira, and a family friend Dan Meredith. The sheer violence of the attack left investigators stunned. Blood-streaked walls, overturned furniture, and signs of a struggle painted a scene of utter chaos. Dan Meredith was the first to encounter Chase, shot at point-blank range as he tried to protect the others. Evelyn was discovered in her bedroom, her body mutilated beyond recognition. Chase's depravity had reached new heights. He had disemboweled her, removed organs, and drained her blood to satisfy his unrelenting hunger. Jason and little David weren't spared from the horror. Chase killed them in cold blood, using their tiny, innocent bodies to carry out his grotesque rituals. The most horrifying revelation came later. Chase had taken David Ferreira's body with him. Investigators later discovered that Chase had cannibalized the infant, committing unspeakable acts in his twisted pursuit of sustenance. It wasn't just murder, it was a systematic dismantling of humanity, a grotesque mockery of life itself. For the first responders, the scene was like something out of a nightmare. Hardened detectives admitted it was the worst they had ever witnessed, and the city of Sacramento plunged into a state of panic. Parents kept their children inside, doors were locked, and neighborhoods felt suffocated by fear. Chase's compulsion for trophies intensified with this massacre. He took body parts, personal belongings, and blood-soaked garments, further tying his need for control to his escalating madness. His delusions had entirely consumed him, making him unpredictable, unrelenting, and more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. In the days that followed, the gruesome details of Chase's crimes gripped national headlines, turning Sacramento into a city paralyzed by fear. Every shadow, every noise became a potential threat. The Vampire of Sacramento had transformed into an urban legend in real time, his name synonymous with terror. For Chase, however, the killing was far from over. Each murder emboldened his belief in his twisted mission, driving him closer to his inevitable capture or more unimaginable horrors, the hunt for the vampire. With the community living in fear, police were desperate to catch the Vampire of Sacramento. Clues were scarce, but a breakthrough came when a witness reported seeing a disheveled man leaving one of the crime scenes. Detectives pieced together evidence, including bloody footprints, that led them to Richard Chase. As the investigation deepened, Chase's erratic behavior became more apparent to those who crossed his path. Neighbors reported seeing him wandering aimlessly, his clothes often stained with what looked like blood. His reputation as the weird guy in the neighborhood turned into something far more sinister as police connected the dots. Chase's history of animal mutilations and bizarre delusions painted a horrifying picture. When authorities finally entered Chase's apartment, they found a scene of unimaginable horror. Blood-stained walls, a fridge filled with human remains, and tools used in his rituals were just the beginning. Among the items recovered were newspaper clippings of his crimes, indicating he followed the media's coverage obsessively. Each clue uncovered revealed the depth of his madness and the terrifying extent of his actions. Police also found syringes, bowls filled with coagulated blood, and sketches that seemed to depict future crimes. It was clear that Chase wasn't just killing, he was experimenting. His obsession with blood had evolved into something methodical, calculated. He believed his body was deteriorating, that he needed to consume blood to survive. These delusions, mixed with his unhinged paranoia, made him a ticking time bomb. Forensic experts later described the scene as one of the most disturbing they had ever encountered. The sheer brutality of his crimes suggested a man who had fully surrendered to his darkest impulses. But one question haunted investigators. How had he managed to slip through the cracks for so long? A history of mental illness, erratic behavior, and violent tendencies had all been ignored. Now, authorities had to face the reality that Richard Chase wasn't just another serial killer. He was a nightmare, personified. As investigators sifted through his belongings, they discovered something even more chilling. A calendar with dates marked in red ink, suspected to be future planned attacks. It was evident that Chase had no intention of stopping. The Vampire of Sacramento was escalating, becoming more reckless, more violent. Had he not been caught when he was, the city might have witnessed a bloodbath unlike anything before. The trial and the unanswered questions. Chase's trial revealed shocking details about his state of mind. His defense argued that he was legally insane and incapable of understanding the consequences of his actions. But the jury disagreed. They believed he knew exactly what he was doing, sentencing him to death by gas chamber. The courtroom became a theater of horror as prosecutors presented evidence of Chase's atrocities. They described in vivid detail the brutality of his crimes, leaving jurors and spectators alike in stunned silence. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, Chase's erratic behavior in court raised more questions than answers. He often mumbled to himself, appeared detached, and even expressed fears of Nazi plots targeting him. But here's where the mystery deepens. Chase himself claimed he was driven by forces beyond his control. Was he a product of his mental illness? Or was there something darker, something that science and reason cannot explain? His chilling belief that drinking blood was necessary for his survival hinted at a mind completely unmoored from reality, yet disturbingly methodical in its madness. The trial left behind a haunting legacy, a case that continues to perplex and horrify those who dare to study it. Yet the debate surrounding Chase's sanity remains unresolved. Some psychiatrists who examined him believed he suffered from severe paranoid schizophrenia, a disorder that distorted his perception of reality beyond recognition. Others, however, pointed to his ability to evade capture, his calculated methods, and his awareness of his crimes as proof that he knew right from wrong. Was Chase a victim of his own fractured mind or a ruthless predator who used insanity as a shield? Another question lingers. Could the justice system have intervened earlier? Prior to his killing spree, Chase had already exhibited disturbing behavior, blood rituals, animal mutilations, and violent outbursts. He had been institutionalized, diagnosed, and later released despite clear signs of escalating psychosis. Could more aggressive intervention have prevented the horrors he committed? Even in the face of his execution sentence, Chase remained an enigma. He reportedly told a psychiatrist that he feared his body would wither away if he did not continue consuming blood. Was this delusion truly his reality or a macabre performance? His death in prison only deepened the mystery, leaving behind a case that continues to haunt criminologists, psychologists, and true crime enthusiasts alike. The trial of Richard Chase was not just about justice, it was a grim reflection of the blurred line between madness and evil. And as his name continues to evoke horror decades later, one final question remains. Was he a man lost to insanity or a monster who knew exactly what he was doing? The final chapter. On December 26, 1980, Richard Chase was found dead in his prison cell, the victim of an apparent suicide. But questions remain. Did he take his own life out of guilt? Or was he still haunted by the delusions that had plagued him for years? Some believe Chase's story ended too soon, leaving behind unanswered questions that will never be resolved. What truly drove him to the edge that day? Was it the crushing weight of isolation or the realization of the horrors he had unleashed? Perhaps his mind, once a battleground of terrifying visions, became a prison more unbearable than the concrete walls surrounding him. Guards who discovered his body spoke of a chilling stillness in the cell, as if death itself had lingered in the air. Even in death, Richard Chase's presence seemed to defy peace. His final act raises the possibility that his inner demons never left him, persisting like a shadow in the darkness. But some who crossed his path believe something more sinister. His presence in the prison was unsettling. Inmates reported hearing him whisper to himself at night, sometimes speaking in a low, guttural voice, words no one could understand. One guard even claimed he saw Chase staring at his reflection, unblinking, a twisted smile curling at his lips. Did Chase know something the rest of the world didn't? Was he still consumed by the hunger that had driven him to kill? Even in death, the terror he inspired never faded. His name alone conjures images of nightmares. His story a grim reminder that true monsters don't always hide in the dark. Sometimes they walk among us, disguised in human skin, their hunger never truly satisfied. The autopsy confirmed he had overdosed on medication he had hoarded over time, but it did little to dispel the aura of unease surrounding his death. Some speculated that Chase had orchestrated his own demise to escape the torment of his mind, while others believed his end was simply inevitable. For the prison staff, his death brought an eerie sense of relief, but also lingering unease. Those who had encountered him spoke of the way he moved, the way his eyes seemed vacant yet filled with something incomprehensible. Even in the lifeless silence of his cell, his story did not end. It only shifted into legend, a whispered tale passed among inmates and officers alike. Years later, some still claim to feel a presence in the very cell where he died, a shadow in the corner, a fleeting chill in the air. Perhaps in some way, Richard Chase never truly left. His legacy, one of fear and madness, remains a scar on history, a reminder that darkness can manifest in the most unexpected places. And as time moves forward, one question lingers. Was his death truly the final chapter, or just another twisted page in the nightmare he left behind? A chilling legacy. The case of Richard Chase is more than a tale of horror. It's a reminder of the fragile line between sanity and madness. How could a man descend so far into darkness without anyone stopping him? And what does his story say about the systems meant to protect us? Even today, Chase's crimes haunt the city of Sacramento. His name remains synonymous with fear, and his case serves as a stark warning about the dangers of untreated mental illness and the unexplainable depths of human depravity. But his story doesn't just end with the crimes he committed. It lingers in the quiet unease that persists among those who study his case. How many more like him walk among us, their broken minds hidden behind ordinary facades? For the families of his victims, the scars remain, unhealed and unforgettable. Each retelling of his crimes reopens wounds, a grim reminder of the lives stolen and the innocence shattered. Yet, for some, His story serves as a macabre fascination, a glimpse into the abyss of the human psyche. But Chase's legacy is more than just bloodshed. It is a specter of something far more terrifying. The knowledge that monsters aren't born in the shadows but among us. That madness can fester unnoticed, ignored until it erupts in unspeakable horror. His story forces us to ask, how many warnings do we miss? How many Richard Chases remain undiscovered, waiting for the right moment to strike? Richard Chase's legacy is not just one of terror. It is a symbol of society's failure to recognize the storm brewing within him. A failure to see the warnings, to act in time. And now, decades later, his name lingers like a whisper in the shadows, a haunting presence that refuses to fade. As the documentary fades to black, one question lingers: could it happen again? Perhaps the most chilling aspect of Chase's case is how easily it could have been prevented. He exhibited disturbing behavior long before his killing spree, yet the warning signs were dismissed, his delusions untreated. He had been institutionalized, but he was deemed safe enough to re-enter society. The system that should have protected both him and the public failed, and the consequences were deadly. It raises a larger question about how mental illness is handled in society. How many others, lost in delusions and spiraling into psychosis, go unnoticed until it's too late? Chase was not a calculated killer, but a man whose fractured mind led him down an irreversible path of carnage. If he had received the proper intervention, could lives have been saved? Beyond the bloodshed, the case of Richard Chase forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. True horror does not exist in myths or urban legends, but in the real world, among those we pass on the street. The face of a monster is not always that of a stranger lurking in the dark. It can be the neighbor next door, the man on the bus, or the one standing in line behind you at the grocery store. The terror Chase inflicted may have ended with his capture, but the echoes of his story remain. He is a case study in the consequences of neglect, the failure of a system that could not see the storm coming. The question is not whether another Richard Chase will emerge, it is whether we will recognize him before it's too late. Some stories leave us with more questions than answers. Richard Chase's life and crimes are a grim reminder of the mysteries of the human mind and the horrors that can arise from untreated illness. What do you think? Could his crimes have been prevented, or are some evils inevitable? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.